And so that duplication of data can actually be deduped and just sent to, say, a server that the customer owns. And then from there, shaped and routed to various third parties, reducing the amount of scripts and the performance impact of client side measurement, reducing the amount of code that's running there, and then taking care of some of that logic that right now gets pushed out to the browser.
Welcome to the Technical Marketing Handbook, a podcast where we put the technical in technical and the marketing in marketing. Today our topic is tag management, and we once again have a wonderful guest. So lean just slightly forward and enjoy the show. Welcome to another episode of the Technical Marketing Handbook. I am again your host, Simo Ahava. And I'm also the co-founder of Simmer, who is kind enough to sponsor this podcast. Now, if you know anything about me, you know that I have a long history with tag management solutions, Google's Tag Manager in particular. In the early days of GTM, I was persuaded by the tag management solution's promise of making everything faster and smoother for the marketer in an organization. This is because a TMS, or a tag management solution, lets you deploy those all-important marketing, advertising, and analytics code snippets without having to make changes to the website itself. It's essentially a type of container which gets privileges from the website by virtue of being deployed on the page, after which it can freely inject any type of code the TMS user likes. Now, this is a huge thing for marketers who often need to introduce new campaigns and tools or make changes in existing solutions with speed and agility rarely matched by the internal IT and DevOps processes within the organization. And this is the core premise and the promise of a tag management solution, and very little has changed to this day. I mean, sure, new features and security measures are introduced all the time, but no TMS is ready to compromise this core idea of circumventing organizational bottlenecks that really exist most commonly to introduce even a semblance of governance to the prolific tool-centered solutionism that modern digital marketing is. Now, as you might have read between the lines, I'm not particularly excited about this aspect of a TMS. There are governance-related bottlenecks in place for a reason. Almost everybody who's worked with a TMS, including myself numerous times, has at some point deployed code that broke some part of the site. There are also scrupulous MarTech vendors who get you to install their code snippet on the site, after which it runs freely in the user's browser, injecting it with malware and collecting data beyond what the user is actually ready to depart with. Tools like GTM do have security measures that help with this issue. There are things like allow and deny lists, which let the site owner choose what tags can run on the site. There are special policies which go on an even more granular level to determine what mechanisms individual tags are allowed to run on the page. And there are unit tests and access control levels and approval queues and workspaces and environments, etc. But it's always going to be up to the organization to decide whether or not to adopt these. And anecdotally, most GTM containers I work with or ever have worked with have nothing of this sort in use. They're still just injection machines with very little oversight from the IT or DevOps of the organization running the site itself. GTM's latest innovation in this space is server-side tagging. Now, the simplest description of server-side tagging is in the name itself. Tag management is moved away from the client or the browser into the server. The key thing here is that this server is owned by the organization running the tag manager and not by Google, for example. Server-side tagging lets the site move those critical and vulnerable data flows to go through the organization's own server, where they can be validated and sanitized before being dispatched to the vendor. Server-side tagging could well be the paradigm shift that the somewhat stagnant tag management space has been waiting for. It brings back a lot of credibility to the TMS capability to reshape the entire organization, and it moves the most hazardous parts of a TMS away from the client where they are vulnerable to these MarTech vendors' manipulations. To help me figure out the current state of tag management, I'm extremely pleased that Adam Halbardier from Google joined me for this interview. I've known Adam for quite some time now, and I consider him to be as good a friend as a Googler really can be. He's been at Google since 2014, working as a senior software engineer on the tagging team, and today he's the tech lead for server-side tagging, among many, many other things. Adam was kind enough to make the time for this interview out of his busy schedule, and even though we talk about really nothing but Google in this interview, it's important to remember that his opinions are his own and not those of his employer. So stick around to hear what we discussed about Google Tag Manager after these words from our podcast sponsor.
Are you a marketing or a data professional looking to skill up? Take a look at the online courses Simmer has to offer at teamsimmer.com. The courses are completely self-paced, and your enrollment will grant you lifetime access to the material, including any updates. Go to teamsimmer.com and use the coupon code HANDBOOK to get 10% off your course purchase. That's teamsimmer.com.
Adam Halbardier from Google, could you please explain how server-side tagging works, especially when compared with traditional web-based tag management?
Yeah, I'd love to, Simo. So traditionally in client-side measurement, you put a snippet of code on your page, on your website, or include an SDK in your app. And that code will do some measurement and then send that data to a collection server to collect that data. In a server-side measurement solution, it can work in conjunction with client-side measurement in that you have a server that the customer owns, that the marketer owns, and you could direct that data from the client, from the browser, from the app to that server. And then in the server, you can shape and route and augment that data, and then control where that data flows, what third parties that data is going to be shared with. So they can work hand in hand. There's also a version of server-side measurement that can work truly server to server, where your web server or some backend that you own that interacts with your app can collect data and then send that to various third parties that you would choose to share it with.
So thanks for that explanation. And I'm going to jump straight to one of the things you mentioned, which I think we both agree is one of the USPs of server-side tagging, and it's this idea of ownership. So with server-side tagging, you essentially created something that the organization running the tag management system should own 100%, like it's their governed solution. Was this a clear decision from day one for Google when you went into server-side tagging, or did you actually debate a more kind of co-shared option between Google and the organization running GTM?
Yeah, so as we looked at kind of measurement and server-side measurement in general, we think that a customer-owned solution is the most durable in the long term. Of course, we assessed different options, but we've chosen to invest in this particular solution, server-side GTM, and this customer-owned server, because it gives a customer the control, the first-party control over their data, and then they can choose what they want to do with that data after they've had the opportunity server-side to cleanse it, to augment it, and to shape it as they see fit.
And there's this notion of first party data here as well, and first party obviously has many flavors to it. We have the technical domain specific definition of first party when there's a shared domain namespace, for example, with the tagging server and then the website sending the data. But then there's also this idea that it's first party is owned by the organization rather than a third party or a vendor. But technically, server-side tagging, at least initially, runs on the Google Cloud Platform, and it runs on App Engine. It downloads a container from Google Tag Manager servers. Is ownership really there, or is it somehow an illusion? What do you think?
Ownership's definitely there. Like any cloud service, the project that the customer sets up they own those resources. They own that data. The cloud is infrastructure that exists on behalf of that customer. And so while the default experiences is to run this on Google Cloud, there's an option to run it on other cloud providers. There's an option to run it on premises. It runs on standard technology that can be run really anywhere. And so we invite that for customers who have other infrastructure or who are already set up elsewhere. They can deploy it that way. But even when on Google Cloud, those resources are still owned by that customer. And that data is not shared with Google unless the customer configures that container, that server, to send that data to Google as they see fit.
And when you look at server-side tagging as a whole, being a relatively new venture for Google, we're talking about the last couple of years here. Do you consider, first of all, as an engineer, do you consider server-side tagging to be an evolution of client-side tag management? Do you think it's the logical next step, or is it a complementary step, like you should run both, or is it something completely separate and shouldn't be confused with either or?
Yeah, I think they work together. Like I mentioned, there's a couple different modes where server-side measurement can live. You can do complete server to server, where your web server is talking to a third party and sharing that data. In the mode that we've taken here with server-side GTM, you typically configure some client-side tag to send data to your server, and that makes it simpler to set up. There's also a way for kind of the server and the client to interact with one another and still leverage some of the technologies that are available in a browser, like cookies. And so I think the solutions are complementary, and that we'll see both in the future, at least for some good amount of time.
What do you think, or maybe you don't have to think, maybe you know, but what was the impetus? What prompted Google to enter server-side tagging? Has this been going on for far longer as a deliberation than just the last couple of years when it's been in alpha and beta testing?
I think we're looking at one where the industry is going in terms of measurement. There's a lot of demand for server-side measurement and leveraging first-party data, a lot of which exists more server-side than client-side. So kind of looking to the future and also recognizing that our customers are asking for this, and we want to be there for our customers. We want to give them solutions that work for them and work for their measurement. And so, we're thinking about how can we address those needs, and we think server-side GTM is one way that we can address some of those needs, some of the demands that we're seeing from the marketer.
And there's been a lot of push, especially from some notable ad tech vendors, to move things to the server. Now, obviously, one of the motivations for that is the increasing unreliability of client-side data collection, whether it's due to browser features such as tracking protections, or whether it's due to privacy legislation making cookies more difficult to work with, more difficult to get consent to use browser storage. Do you think that this is a pitch for server-side tagging to treat it as a kind of get your data back mechanism, get back the data that's been taken away from us for all this time?
So how we think about it is it's leaning into first-party data. It's leaning into building those relationships with your customer, with a business building the first-party relationship with the customer. And our vice president of analytics, insight, and measurement, Vidya, talked about this at Google Marketing Live, how we see the future of measurement as first-party data, consented data, and then models for everything else where that data isn't available. And so that first-party story is really about building strong relationships between the business and their customers. And so server-side measurement very much fits in that mode of being able to bring your first-party data, whether it's online or offline, and bringing that together with the data that customers give you about themselves in that online space.
So one of the things when you look at the templates in Google Tag Manager or the built-in templates is that it's not just Google there. There are other templates as well for vendors in your space and vendors in ad tech and martech and analytics. When you design things like server-side tagging and the APIs, how much of your time is spent figuring out what is specifically good for Google products like the measurement protocol APIs and the send events to Google APIs versus what is good for the field in general, like more generic APIs? What's the relationship between the two from an engineering point of view?
Yeah, they're both important. We've invested a lot of effort both into what we build in terms of Google integrations and in a lot of effort in supporting the wider ecosystem. And if you look at some of the technologies that we built in the last couple of years, it's very clear. Historically, Google Tag Manager has had quite a number of third-party tags built into the Google Tag Manager product. We have a program called the Vendor Template Program where vendors could build tags and get them integrated into GTM. But since then, we've built this really awesome technology called custom templates and the sandbox JavaScript. And that tech gives really makes it possible for a community of people to build tags within this platform in a way that's safe, in a way that gives a visibility into what these tags are doing. And it makes it safe for other people with eyes open to be able to pull that into their container, into their space, and to use that tag. This technology, custom template, sandbox JavaScript, is available both for the web and for the server. And we really believe that that's kind of the future for Tag Manager in terms of being able to extend, adoption, community building out the things that they need. And we are there to support in that we provide the APIs that allows that sandbox JavaScript to break out of the sandbox, to do additional things. And we look hard at what those things are. Some of those APIs were built, are driven by the needs of integrating with Google products. But we also can see what are the needs of other vendors that are out there. There's a lot of tags in Tag Manager, for example, and we're working through what would it look like to support all of these tags. What are the API needs that are necessary? And we've added a number kind of over time. So it's a balance between the two. We have a lot of different initiatives going on, but we're very committed and invested in the community template gallery and the sandbox JavaScript tech, and we built all of server-side GTM on that tech. So we're very, very committed to seeing it successful long term.
One of the things that really, for me, was the clinching point for Google Tag Manager to become my favorite tool was, at least in the early years, there was this immediacy between the community and then the engineers and then the product managers and the GTM team in general. It seemed like such an organic product to emerge out of a specific need rather than something that was first built and tailored in a lab behind closed doors. And this relationship between being able to submit feature requests and see those come to fruition. Do you think that there still is that kind of a relationship? Because obviously we don't have it used to be back in the days of Google Plus. We had the Google Plus forum where many people from your team as well frequented. Do you think custom templates are now the way for the community to participate, or do you still see there's Google Tag Manager to be a special product in the sense that there's such an immediate access to the engineers as well?
Yeah, I think like any product that is grown out of its infancy, there's a need to scale. And so Tag Manager has a large user base, and the engineering team's still limited, right? There's still only so many people that work on it. And so we have a lot of support across Google. There's our customer support representatives. We have technical representatives that field a lot of customers and field a lot of customer requests. And there are forums for our partners to reach out. There's always the feedback option within the product that does route to the engineering team to take a look at that feedback. We look at it, and when it's actionable, we'll take action on it. And so we want to be responsive to those things. But as the product is growing, of course, it can't necessarily have that same organic feel that it had early on. And server-side GTM has been in a similar boat. Like as we launched it, it's growing, and so as the community grows, we rely more on the community to support one another. And there are channels where our customers can reach out to us, and we try to be responsive to that as much as we can. And when that feedback is actionable, we capture it and we address it.
Related to something you mentioned earlier about when you talked about the sandbox APIs and security, GTM actually has released a lot of features over the years designed specifically to improve the trust relationship between, for example, IT and GTM users. So you've released things like environments, there's policies, there's approval queues, and I don't think people really speak enough about these. I think these have, at least in the grand scheme of things, have been swept under the rug in face of all the cool stuff that GTM lets you do without having to bother with those approval queues. Do you think these efforts that you do to foster this trust and this relationship between IT and governance, do you think these features are being widely adopted? And because I don't think they are, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So these features are built to address specific needs. There are organizations that have needs to QA in different environments. There are organizations that need the governance of a disconnect and role between the marketer who's making the changes and some approver that pushes those changes live. There are other things like policies that you referred to. There's the allow list and the deny list for classes of tags or individual tags, where IT can control what is and isn't allowed to be done within a GTM container. And these all exist to foster that trust across the organization. GTM's not just a marketer tool. It's a tool to facilitate communication and interactions between these different parts of the organization. And we want to give organizations the tools that they need to do that, to feel comfortable in that. The level of adoption, I think, just depends on the organization. Like any security related features, there's always a friction between ease of use and kind of the security that comes with that particular feature. And I think every organization needs to find the balance for themselves.
Right. So when we have these features like policy scripts and these allow lists and block lists, do you see a risk of a strict organization implementing so many of these that the qualities that make GTM what it is, the time to market being really fast, being able to deploy changes without having to wait for release cycles, do you think they actually erode enough of GTM's benefits away that it doesn't really make sense to have GTM on the site at all at that point?
From what I understand, in organizations that where tagging is very, very difficult, it's difficult to get code changes out, GTM still provides a safe way to do that. In an organization that's very security conscious, like you're suggesting, that GTM snippet can be really locked down to only do certain types of integrations, say only Google Analytics or Google Ads measurement. And in that case, even within those kind of constraints, GTM still has a lot of value to the marketer to update, say, their conversion tracking rules without adding undue risk to the site.
One of the things I absolutely want to ask is, and put you in a tough spot here, is how do you design features so that both power users and total beginners could benefit from GTM and not either be underwhelmed or overwhelmed by what you put out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's really hard. It's a hard thing to do. I think what you see is we have GTag.js, and it has a number of default behaviors that just work for Google integrations. And fortunately, a lot of those default behaviors can be facilitated inside GTM relatively easily. But it's very hard to find kind of that balance between the power user and the basic user that just wants to get some basic things done. We try to make the default experience as seamless and simple as possible, and we try to give as few kind of options to break it or make it not work, and tools to detect when it does. Things like Tag Assistant that can show you when things are not behaving the way that you would expect. And then pushing those more advanced features down below the fold, so to speak, right, into things like the more options deeper down in the tag configuration. So there's kind of a balance. We also have an organization of user experience experts that can help us think through what the experience is for our different users. and help us design features that will work best.
You already mentioned this in one of your responses, but I just want to pick it a bit more. So tag management solutions typically have been marketed as a marketer's tool, pun intended. But where do you think it sits within the modern digital organization? Is it still a almost no-code solution for digital marketers, or do you see, or when you're feature engineering, do you see it as something that sits in IT or web developers, or in some kind of an agile setting? Where do you think it sits best, in your opinion?
Yeah, going back to what we were talking about before, GTM is about facilitating relationships across the organization. So it's not just a marketer's tool. It's a way to bridge that gap between marketers and developers. It's a way to give marketers the tools that they need to get their job done in an efficient way, but to give developers in the IT organization the controls that they need to ensure that that is safe. And so, and there's other teams that are involved in a modern digital organization as well, like compliance teams and GTM can help bridge this gap via those on-page controls, the policies like you mentioned earlier, the allow list, the deny lists, and so a modern organization, a digital organization, needs to plan for the relationship between these and how they choose to interact. We seek to be a tool in which those organizations can interact with one another.
One of the big frictions in modern digital organizations comes from performance, and seems to be like, especially with for example, the page experience update in Google search now, it seems like at least now everybody's concerned about performance, making sure sites run fast, making sure they run smoothly. And so much of client-side scripting these days is just a compromise between what you can do and how much it hurts performance. So I'm wondering, again, it's so valuable to ask this from an engineer working on the GTM team. How much does this duality affect your daily work when you develop features? Because you have triggers that explicitly tell the user, by the way, this might hurt performance, so make sure you know what you're doing. So is this something that you need to battle with on a daily basis when developing features?
Yeah, it's something we think about a lot. We've put a lot of work on the GTM website to make the JavaScript that we send down to the browser as small as possible. Based on that configuration, we have a complex kind of system to prune out all the things that aren't necessary, so that we're really minimizing the amount of code that needs to go down on that page to do the measurement that the marketer is asked to do on that page. So it's something we think about a lot, and we try to keep that code small and efficient and compatible across as much of the browser ecosystem as we can. But this also speaks to the topic of server-side tagging and where that can come in and give some of these benefits. With server-side tagging, there's this relationship between client-side tagging and server-side tagging, and that in a client-side tagging, often you'll have many different scripts for different measurement vendors running on the page, collecting and perhaps sending that data to different places. And so that duplication of data can actually be deduped and just sent to, say, a server that the customer owns, and then from there shaped and routed to various third parties, reducing the amount of scripts and the performance impact of client-side measurement, reducing the amount of code that's running there, and then taking care of some of that logic that right now gets pushed out to the browser, that gets pushed out to the client. That logic can live in the server instead.
That's an excellent point. I think one of the absolute benefits of server-side tagging is this idea that it can reduce client-side bloat, if used correctly, of course. And there's no mechanism built into server-side tagging that automatically does this work for you. You need to engineer this, and you need to change your client-side code to accommodate this. But one of the concerns that I've had regarding this is what you gain in performance, you kind of lose with transparency, because you no longer have visibility to what happens to the data once it enters the server. I'm talking from the looking at what happens in the browser, for example. So you might see a Google Analytics 4 hit be dispatched from the browser to the server, but kind of behind your back, this hit can then be forwarded to not just Google, but other vendors as well. Do you see this as a problem? And is this something you're trying to address with server-side tagging in the near future?
Yeah, that's a good question. Server-side tagging does take this data in and shape and route it, and the visibility that we give into where that data goes, it happens on a couple of different fronts. You could see in the preview mode, so there's a preview page you can pull up and get boxes that show for individual tags what request did that tag make, what data did that tag send out of the server. There's also the option to hook in and get data back about what tags fired in your server. So there's a Sandbox JS API similar to what we have in web that allows you to do monitoring of your container. And then you can audit the permissions for each of those tags. So because all of the tags are built in Sandbox JavaScript, including the Google tags, you can see what data those tags, what permission those tags have in terms of sending data out of the browser. The tag has to ask for permission to send an HTTP request and to where. Beyond that, Simo, I know you have made a feature request for server-side GTM that we log or give some other kind of global visibility to all requests that leave the server. And that's something that we're considering, and it is in our backlog in terms of how we can best kind of expose that to the user. We want to be transparent about the data that's leaving the server. We firmly believe that the customer owns this server, the customer owns this data, and they should have visibility into what's going on there.
One follow-up to that is there a way to retrieve back to the browser what happened in the server? So one of the this solves a great deal. The things you described solve for the organization to have accountability and to be able to retrace what happens and to be able to log that information. But one blind spot is still the actual browser user who doesn't know what is happening with their data. So is there a way, or is there something planned to be able to communicate back from the server back to the browser and then have the browser process those things? So one thing I'm thinking about is when I send a GA4 hit to the server, I would like the server to respond back to the browser that, hey, by the way, this GA4 hit also fired this, and this, and this tag for auditing purposes, for example, and to make sure that my consent is being respected.
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have any current plans to report back to the browser what is happening server side, because that is the responsibility of the organization.
Yep.
And that's no different than client side measurement. Client side measurement is more visible in that you can see the requests that went out from the browser, of course. But server side GTM doesn't do anything novel or new from this perspective. The customer, the marketer, organization has always had the ability to use weblogs to do data collection, and so an audit of how data is used and consenting respect is always something ultimately that lands on the organization. And so I agree. The user themselves can't necessarily see what happened in the browser, but it's still the organization's responsibility to make sure that they're handling data with care, and that we're giving them the tools to know that that's happening.
That's an excellent point, and that's something that's also often overlooked. I think when the solutions are engineered, there's a lot of pressure to be put on the vendor to do everything right, and that kind of people expect it to absolve the organization running these tools from all responsibility, when in fact it is always. And this kind of takes us full circle because server-side tagging runs on the organization's environment. It's owned by them. It's their governance. So, throwing your hands up and saying Google should do this isn't probably the best cop-out when you start working with server-side tagging.
And I would also interject here
Sure.
that even at server-side tagging, to your question about the visibility into where the requests are going, with policies, which server-side tagging supports, you could restrict the access where any tag globally across that container can access. Yeah. So you can say that all tags in this container are restricted to only talking to certain domains.
We're just about to wrap up, but since I have you here, you know that I have to ask a roadmap question from you. So I just want to know, what are some of the biggest things coming down the line for server-side tagging and for GTM in general?
First, I'll call out consent configurations in GTM, which gives a lot more control both to the tags and to the marketer to decide how they want to handle consent configurations, how they should be handled in a particular mode. and for a particular vendor and how that data is being used. That's something that the team's been hard at work with and continues the story of consent mode in general, which has been a part of the Google tags for some time now, and responding to consent mode appropriately, and only collecting consented data when that's permitted. Beyond that, we're looking a lot at the relationship between GTM and GTAG and where there's friction, where there's confusion between these offerings, and how we can reduce that friction or that confusion. And then on the server-side GTM side, we've been working hard on the Google Ads and Floodlight tags, which are naturally kind of a next evolution after the Google Analytics tags that have been in there for some time. And then we'll be looking at other integrations with cloud services and really looking to kind of what are the new exciting possibilities that we can bring to capabilities in that product, in that feature. Now that this first party data is in a server that the customer owns, what are the new things that we can do with that? And so high level, those are kind of the things that we're thinking about, consent mode, consent configurations in GTM, and then on server-side GTM, really building out those Google integrations and then integrations with other cloud services as well.
So just to quickly clarify on this, because the consent configurations I think it's been a bit confusing for some, but they are specifically a GTM feature, and they add additional level of control to Google tags in GTM and to other vendors' tags as well. But they're kind of separate from the GTag consent API in that they are technically different, or?
Yeah, so the GTag consent APIs allow a consent framework or for the IT organization or whoever is controlling it to indicate kind of state of consent, and that will control the behavior of Google tags, whether GTM or GTag. But then these consent configurations also allow the marketer to have more control over how they want those tags to behave in particular modes. And it also gives kind of extends that option to the third-party tags as well.
Will consent mode and consent configurations be integrated into server-side tagging as well? If I wanted to change tag behavior in server-side based on what the user has set in their browser as their consent behavior, for example?
I expect that you'll see those consent configurations come to server-side sometime in the not-too-distant future.
That's all I wanted to hear. All right, Adam, we're about to wrap up, so I have one last little thought experiment for you, and I'm very curious about what you'll answer. But imagine that I am now able to give you godlike powers, and with the snap of your fingers, you can change any aspect of GTM, Google Tag Manager, past, present, or future, and you don't have to worry about what your boss says, you don't have to worry about what the market says, you don't have to worry about release cycles, or you don't even have to worry about how the browser works. What would you change, and why?
Personally, I would love to see all the custom JavaScript and custom HTML move to sandbox JavaScript. I think the sandbox JavaScript tech just gives an immense amount of visibility and control to the organization, to the user. And custom JavaScript, custom HTML has risks. It also can degrade performance of the site. And so it was the custom HTML, custom JavaScript was something that is important. We recognize that it was important, but it was also before the sandbox JavaScript tech existed. And so there's a lot of those legacy tags out there. If I could snap my fingers, I would love to see all of that moved to sandbox JavaScript. However, I have asked some other engineers on the team what they would say to this question, people who have been around for many years, and what kind of they would change at the snap of a finger. One engineer I asked said that they would get rid of both the two data models for a data layer. There's a V1 and a V2 of data layer. And for historic reasons, we support both, but it creates complexity in our code that they would love to see us rid of. Another engineer I asked said that they would kind of snap their fingers and make the integration between web and server-side GTM much more seamless, which I would agree with. Right now, when you use server-side GTM, you use server-side GTM, and then you can make changes to your web GTM to talk to server GTM. but to have that kind of that configuration more seamless, to bring kind of the experience together, and to make transitioning from one to the other easier. I would love to see that as well. And that's something that we're thinking hard about, but I can't snap my fingers to fix it.
You can if you believe in yourself. The problem with this question is that whenever I ask it, I get 50 follow-up questions, and we can go on for another hour with this, but I think I'll leave you alone for now. This has been very, very enlightening. As a kind of GTM fanboy, I'm super grateful for you to make the time for this interview, and also for all the work you've put into, specifically into server-side tagging, which I do really personally believe is somewhat of a paradigm shift when it comes to tagging. I'm really, really excited to see what other tools and features are coming up, especially that improve even further the organization's capability to take ownership of those flaky data streams. Thank you, Adam. I'm just feeling so fortunate to have such amazing guests join this podcast, people who are much more qualified than I am to talk about any of the topics we've chosen for this podcast. And to celebrate this, in a couple of weeks' time, we'll have our first solo episode, so no guests this time around. Until then, take care.